Hello, everyone, and welcome to another program of GTX Connects. Why Can't We Be Friends? We are in partnership with Dell Medical's community-driven initiatives. My name is Kelly McGinty, and I am one of the co-producers of this program. We are here tonight talking about addiction and asking questions to our panelists. So if you want to go ahead and click on the chat icon, you can do that. There is a little link in here that says Slido/event and then slash some letters and numbers. If you click on that, you will be able to see the questions that are going to be asked. You can ask more questions, and you can vote on questions that have already been submitted so that it can kind of bump them up to the top of the list if that's something that you want to hear about. So with that said, we are going to start with our introduction of our lovely panelists this evening, and I will turn it over to them.
So I should just introduce myself. I'm Chrissy, and so I'm addicted to more. That means that it's mainly alcohol, but anything else that I can change the way I feel. That I was born, basically, I feel like I was born different. And to cope with those things, that's, I use whatever form of anything to change how I fit into society. I live in Leander, and yeah, I'm really glad to be here. It's so good to see the other two panelists.
Hey everybody, my name's Andy. I'm zooming in from San Antonio, Texas. I primarily identify as an alcoholic. Sometimes I also say that I'm kind of an addict of every variety. I have also used other substances and other things to change the way that I feel and respond to things and situations as well. Nice to meet everyone.
Hi, my name is Lisa. I am in Austin, Texas, and I am a recovering alcoholic and addict. My sobriety date is 5/13 of 2016.
Okay, great. So I kind of go back and forth between the Zoom room and clicking into Slido. So if you kind of see me clicking back and forth, that's what I'm doing so that I can check out the questions. And so one of the first questions, there is one on here that's kind of toward the bottom, but I think it's a good starting question anyway. So it says, how long have you been in recovery? So I think this would be a good opportunity to kind of let people know a sobriety date, how long you've been in recovery, and maybe what it was that brought you into recovery. And anybody can answer this question, or everyone can answer it. It's up to you guys. So go ahead.
I can start with that one. I've been sober since May 2nd of 2018. So counting a little over 3.5 years. I've been in recovery for about 6 or 7. This is definitely the longest time that I've ever stayed away from substances. And what brought me in was that I couldn't really deny anymore that I had a problem with alcoholism specifically, and physical side effects that I was seeing. Yeah, I couldn't really pretend anymore that I was just like other people is what brought me in.
My sobriety date is September 14th of 2015. And yeah, what brought me in is that my basically CPS and with things that I didn't really think I was an alcoholic. I thought I was, doing okay and making things okay and everything was well and managing life. And I had this hard realization that I wasn't and that I might be an alcoholic. And I started going to meetings and I decided for myself that yes, I do qualify to be an alcoholic.
I'm Lisa, and I already said my sobriety date, but that's definitely not my first shot at getting sober. I got what we like to call a nudge from the judge in I think like 2013, and I cobbled together a few months, but nothing really stuck. And what brought me back and what really kicked my ass this time was that I had everything that I thought that I could want, like a really amazing job and someone that I wanted to marry and a house and all of that. And I couldn't stop. Like I couldn't stop drinking and using drugs. And so that was my really hard realization. Like, okay, material things aren't enough, then something's got to give.
Okay. So the next question is, do you think that addiction is a mental illness? And I'm gonna let you guys answer this, and I kind of have an answer too, and I'm curious to see if you guys sound like mine. No.
I'll start
So,
with that one. Um, Substance abuse disorder. I think that that's the most current name, because it has changed a little bit throughout the years, excuse me, is classified in whichever medical book it is where they have diagnoses for mental health or other illnesses as well. So a lot of the times I'd love to think that my opinion on certain things outweighs people who have studied for years and years and professionals within certain fields, because of course, ego and pride are a big part of my sobriety journey and overcoming that. But I've learned that my opinion does not matter when it comes to these things. It is classified as a mental health disorder, and that's the end of that sentence when it comes to me.
thanks, Andy.
Yeah, I'd also like to touch on that it's definitely like scientific fact these days that it is classified as a mental health disorder, which for me makes it more manageable. It makes it less like nebulous, because addiction and alcoholism can get really sticky and it can get really emotional and all of that. But um, to have there be a clear cut diagnosis and people who study it and help us with that, I think can be really empowering.
Wow, that's some great stuff. Yeah, I definitely think that it is a mental illness. I think that since it affects your mind, your body, and spirituality, it affects all three of those things. And whenever you have an addiction, and it's just like I said before, I feel like I was born this way, and just like somebody might be born with, without some fingers, or born with, it's just a different type of, just, I guess, I don't want to say disease or illness because that's kind of has a stigma against it, but it's just, it does make it more manageable if it's a medical condition that can be treated, and it just can't be treated yet fully with medication. And usually with addiction, I have found that there's also other things, mental health, like depression and anxiety and things like that. I won't get into all of that, but I do find a lot of times those coincide together.
So when Andy was answering, he was talking about the DSM, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, and I believe that the latest edition is 5. And so I always thought it was interesting because I definitely agree, obviously that it's a mental health issue, right? It's in the DSM. They treat it as a mental health disorder. But I always thought it was really interesting because for me, it was like a mental health disorder that turned into a physical health disorder, because when you have those biological body cravings, like when your body gets to a point where it cannot physically function without the use of a substance to prevent some sort of withdrawal, then I feel like it's almost really crossing that boundary between mental and physical health. And of course, anybody who's in recovery understands the devastating impact that using any substance, whether it's alcohol or drugs or whatever, in excess has physical tolls on everything, the liver, the stomach, the skin, everything you can really think of. So I always thought that it's just a really, of the mental health disorders that we have, it is definitely most particularly interesting to me with the crossover that it has. But yeah. So let's see, let's get back into Slido. So what is the biggest challenge that you have in dealing with people's assumptions about addiction?
I can touch on that. Like the very first thing that crossed my mind was that sometimes when we tell people, or when I tell people that I don't drink, they kind of push and they're like, why? And I've kind of learned to deal with that in my own way over time, but a lot of the time I would say I'm an alcoholic, and it would just sometimes people would start to kind of talk to me different or look at me kind of different, as though being in recovery means that I'm there because I've done something wrong or I've done something bad. And that was a hard thing to navigate, particularly with my family, because I figured like, well, I'm in recovery, so everything's fine. But just like there are far-reaching physical consequences, there are also far-reaching social consequences of alcoholism and addiction, particularly in the family arena. And so that was a hard thing to overcome, was just like the initial reaction of identifying to somebody, especially someone new, that I am an alcoholic, because that just, it seems like there's this cascade of what that actually means.
I'll jump in there too. For me, the one thing that still, to be honest, really bugs me are the people who are under the impression that addiction is a choice that one can just turn on and off. Um, and the lack of understanding about how it is a mental health diagnoses, and the fact, I'll speak for myself. I had undiagnosed mental health things that happened that turned into addiction, because there was no verbiage at the time for me, or no help to reach out to very early on in life. And just to, and I'll also say this, like, to me as a gay man, it's akin to people asking me, like, why not just like, why don't you just turn straight? Like, those people that have those kinds of thoughts as well, that like my sexual orientation can be a choice. It's high up there with me, at the level of shock that sometimes I get into when people just lack that basic comprehension.
Or even on that note, like when people put it in a context of willpower,
Let me mute
which
myself.
is yeah, which is something that anyone in the recovery community can kind of laugh at, because for us it's not a matter of will, it's not a matter of choice, and it's not a matter of try or don't try or whatever. We're just like, we're completely incapable of drinking or using safely. When someone says, especially being out in Austin, in such a drinking town, I'll say, "Oh, no thanks, I'm an alcoholic," or "No thanks, I don't drink," or something, and someone says, "Oh, but one won't kill you," or "Oh, but one," and yeah, it's kind of like, ah, well, that can be hard to deal with, as well as the, "Oh, one won't kill you." Oh, debatable.
Yeah, I want to touch on that too. Yeah, one doesn't just happen to be one for somebody who's addicted. That's why I said, like, I'm addicted to more, is because one turns into 15 beers or whatever, and I can't control it. If I put it into my body, I can't control the fact that I want more and more, and then it's also physically on my body. And like Andy was saying, it is something you're born with, and you cannot choose it. That's exactly how I feel. That just like you can't choose whether or not gay, bisexual, lesbian. I just don't think you can choose your addiction. It just happens that that's a coping mechanism that I had before I knew what mental illness was, or if I had mental illnesses, it was the way I coped with them before. And I also don't like when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, and I was in a few other programs as well, but this is the one that works for me, that I wasn't, like living under a bridge, or I wasn't, homeless. I did, I had a car, I had a job, things weren't that bad. It's not like, the homeless guy underneath the bridge that, is an alcoholic who can't get help or something. And also whenever I go out and people always ask me if I want to drink or something, I'm like, no, I don't drink. And the question, like, why? It's just easier now to say, I'm an alcoholic, or I'm allergic to it, or whatever. Whatever the reason. And because like I said, that one will turn into many more.
So this next question kind of goes along. Sorry, I got like mascara in my eye, so I'll be rubbing my eye like every 2 seconds for the rest of this program. But the next question is, why can't people just quit? And I feel like you guys are kind of answering that already, but that is the next question. Why can't people just quit?
Sometimes, so there are ways of quitting. One of them is death. Another one is, ending up in jail or in a psychiatric institution for a long period of time. And another way is to continue on using, and hopefully those first two things won't happen to you. And then the fourth is recovery. I like to explain it to people that unfortunately my body chemistry changed. In my case, due to trauma. And then my body recognizes alcohol first and foremost as anxiety medication. So whenever I would drink, all of a sudden I could breathe in a normal way. I wasn't panting. I wasn't, exasperated for breath. I didn't feel a tightness in my neck or in my chest. And that really happened early on for me. 16, 17 was when that immediate effect started happening. So my body chemistry changed because of things that happened, and my reactions. And then, enough was not enough. There's in recovery, there's a saying that one drink is too many because it will activate that physical reaction. And then 1,000 will never be enough, because they're literally, I mean, I don't know. I haven't gotten to 1,000. I've tried to count to 1,000, but you just build this endless amount of oh, what's the word that I'm looking for? Tolerance. Your tolerance just keeps getting higher and higher and higher, and eventually you're drinking earlier in the day, later on at night, and then it's just, a little snowball that starts at the top of a mountain, and just it depends on how slow or how fast it can get into that huge situation where everything gets destroyed. But yeah, those are the ways that you can stop. It's only one of four.
Someone recently told me that drinking is borrowing happiness from tomorrow. And I feel like a great way to answer that question is to look at it in that context. If drinking is borrowing happiness from tomorrow, the more I drink, the more debt I get into, the more I steal from my tomorrow. And that debt, just like Andy is saying, we build up a tolerance and a dependence on it. So does our debt grow, right? And so just like somebody who racks up a lot of credit card debt, um, that doesn't just go away. You don't tell somebody like, well, why don't you just make your debt go away? Like they have to pay it. They have to go, they have to get help somehow to make that go away. It doesn't just go away on its own. You can ignore it, but it's just going to get worse. And that happens with alcoholism too. We build up this tolerance or this dependence on something that to our bodies feels like anxiety medication, just like Andy said. And so the more that we use it, the less capable we are of quitting. It's just, it doesn't just go away. You can't just snap your fingers, and that's just not how it works.
Yeah, I love everything that's been said. I agree. I don't have anything else to say.
Got it. So there's another question on here that was kind of related to something that Andy had said, and it says, do you think that addiction is related to trauma in any way?
For me, I definitely think it did. After I finally got an opportunity to seek treatment, that so many people do not. I'm very fortunate that I ended up in a career path with amazing health insurance, that took me to places that normal people do not get to go. And I'm sober today because of that. But for me, once I was in a place with medical staff and mental health staff, um, finally I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and panic disorder. And then all these little swirling dots that had always surrounded my life were all of a sudden being lined up. Um, and it really helped me break the stigma of I'm not a bad person. I am a sick person that just didn't get a chance to get help beforehand. Um, and thinking about the last thing we talked about also, we just happen to have something that's more visually um, obvious. um, Alcohol abuse and drug abuse, it's obvious, right? When those things are unhealthy coping mechanisms, but there's a million things that everybody does that is addictive behavior to change the way that they feel or react, like romantic or sexual or shopping or food. There's all these other what we call behavioral um, addictions as well that can happen. And sitting me, I know I'm an alcoholic. I know that I can be an addict. I know many people in my life who, it's one string of romantic inquest after another that's very super unhealthy, where the common denominator is always that person, or the shopping addiction or things like that. It's just that for us in the recovery world with alcohol and drugs, we just have something that's visible, and that started out as very socially acceptable. Because let me tell you, in the world that I come from, it's common to drink when you have a stressful day, and it is very taboo when you want to go to a therapist when you've had a stressful day. So you're encouraged for the former rather than the latter. very early on in life. You're supposed to be strong, is another thing as well.
Yeah, I feel like trauma is directly related to most addiction. I mean, it wasn't like I had a bad childhood or anything like that, but just dealing how I was taught to how I was brought up to deal with all those emotions and things that happened in my life, and that was drinking. And my family, my father's an alcoholic, but my mother is not. And just whenever he had a long day at work, he would have a drink. And so growing up with that, and I'm not saying that happens for everybody, but growing up with that, that's when I had a long day, I wanted to have a drink. Then it started earlier and earlier. The older I got, the more it seemed like the stress was piling up. Like Lisa was talking about the debt, there's more piling up, and I just wanted to relieve it somehow. And that is the quickest, most effective way I knew how to relieve myself without seeing a therapist. Because, and I do also remember my mom asking her when I was young, saying, maybe I need to see a counselor. I think I'm depressed. And she would just say, snap out of it. And I'm like, I can't just snap out of it. Like I don't know how to do that. And then, little by little, I could breathe again after taking, whatever form, alcohol or drugs. I felt like I could live and just go day to day, because I knew at the end of the day I would get some relief and be able to breathe again.
Thank you.
And the thing about alcoholism and addiction is that it is what we like to say the great equalizer. It can hit anybody and everyone and anyone, regardless of their background or their childhood or their job or their, whatever trauma or no. But another thing to think of is that addiction and alcoholism are forms of extreme self-harm at the end of the day. And so the things that we get ourselves into in our addiction can, we get ourselves into some pretty traumatic situations. And so it just starts to kind of compile. And that's when things get kind of hard.
Well, I think that's an excellent point. I think everybody has made really excellent points. And that compiling, it also reminds me of, because most of the people who know me, who are close to me, know that I am in recovery from alcoholism as well. Maybe not even everyone in the audience or Zoom room. Some of these people know me, and even if it's a surprise, that's fine. But I was treating anxiety similarly to the way you guys are talking about, right? And my trauma was domestic violence. And so I'm treating this anxiety, right? And then all of a sudden, the thing I'm using to treat the anxiety is also causing more anxiety. So then the only medicine I have to treat it is what I'm already using. So then I'm using more and more. And all of a sudden, it's just like the anxiety is always there. And the only thing that makes it go away is using this substance in larger and larger quantities and more often. And it is a snowball, and it is layers. And then in the process, you too become your own traumatizer, right? You're traumatizing yourself. And it's just it's a really, really vicious cycle. And I love what you said about it being the great equalizer, because, I have a master's degree in counseling psychology. I worked in addiction. I did my internship at an inpatient treatment facility for adolescents. And all of this was before I was in the throes, the cusps, whatever you want to call it, the claws of that alcoholism. And, I was trained. I had I knew what the coping skills were. I knew what all the things were, but it did not stop my mind from changing. It did not stop my body from becoming addicted. Those things didn't protect me. So it doesn't matter what kind of education you have, what kind of experiences you have. it can get you, and it will. Let me see some of these other questions. There was one on here that I was like, I want to ask that one next. Are interactions with others easier for you if they know you're an alcoholic, or do you think once people know that information, they treat you differently? So, is it easier when people know you're an alcoholic, or do you feel like they treat you differently after they find out?
Yeah, I think it just kind of depends. It depends on your own attitude, and how you feel about it. Because there's some people, like, I don't tell right away in my profession, and it's just I don't tell them right away because I mean there's no reason to. I do know when I was first in recovery, every friend that I had that I drank with basically is not my friend anymore. And they always felt like, I don't know why this is, but they always feel like they have to explain their drinking to me. And I'm like, I don't really care about your drinking. Like, that's your stuff. And I still just want to be your friend. Like, we were friends when we were drinking. Now that I'm not drinking, it doesn't really matter that you're still drinking. Like, because you're still the same person I knew when we were drinking. So I feel like people act a little bit different sometimes, or I'll get a bunch of questions like, or people will say, oh, maybe later, after you have like 5 years sober, you can have a drink again. And I'm like, I just don't want to take that chance. If I could, I know I can't, because I know I know the patterns and everything. But yeah, just how people perceive me as a sober person in recovery, just really either you're gonna like me or you're not gonna like me. So and I really don't have opinion on how you feel or what what you like. It's like, it's about people that are accepting, and that's with anything, not just in recovery. It's with anything. And I think too also, a lot of my friends that were drinking or using drugs whenever I got sober, don't want to stop and don't want to look at themselves and don't think that they're an alcoholic or what have you. And that's not my decision to make, but for some reason people think it is. And I'm like, it's okay, like, you can ask as many questions as you want, but I do find also that people that are not addicted to any substances or anything, kind of don't understand or don't get it, and that's okay. And they'll ask questions and wonder why. But just like, just like I don't understand some things, I don't know where I'm going with the rest of that. It's off topic, so I'm just gonna pass with that, actually.
You're fine. That made sense.
Immediately, the first thing that popped into my mind is one of my favorite things that I've learned in recovery, which is that other people's opinion of me is absolutely none of my business. And so I feel like there's, especially with alcoholics and addicts, like when we're using, of course, we're concerned with perception because we're trying to manipulate how we look to other people while we're in our cups. And then once we're out of our cups and all of that like armor falls away, we feel really like naked, and we're like you know extra conscientious of the way that people perceive us. And I love being told that how other people perceive me is really none of my business. I just need to stick to what's going to make me happy and healthy and whole. But the byproduct of that is that people view me in a better light because I am happier, because I am healthier. I have sponsees come to me who say, like, you know, they'll be early in sobriety and they'll say, well, how do I talk to other people about being an alcoholic or whatever? And what I've come to find is the way that I present myself is usually mirrored by the person that I'm talking to. In early recovery, when I'm a little bit skittish, when I'm a little bit unsure, that's kind of how I talk to people. And then they in turn have lots of questions and they kind of want to know more and all of that. But the longer I stay sober and the more that I become my authentic self, the easier it is to talk about it. But you know, the more confidence that I present when I talk about my recovery, the easier it is to have those conversations, and the less the perception of me changes. I find that I can be really consistent across the board, and that gets rid of the fear of what people think of me or how I'm going to come off.
You know,
And
stigma is an ugly word. I was going to add to that because people are always going to be afraid of things that are different from them. You know, if we switch the word addiction from that question, I believe the question was, can you repeat the question that we're talking about just to make sure, Kelly, that I'm staying on track?
yeah, for sure. It was the way people treat you. Do you think that when you tell people that you are an alcoholic, that they treat you differently? And is it something that you just kind of like tell everyone? And once people find out, do you feel like they treat you differently?
They do. Absolutely, they do if they're not from the same world that I'm in. But if you switch alcoholic with cancer patient or, you know, homosexual or foreigner, you know, thinking about this in the construct of like a diversity and inclusion conversation, I know that can open up a lot of different conversations, but, you know, people are always going to have a reaction, and sometimes it's visceral, to something that is very different from what they know already in the world. So, you know, it's just together fighting those stigmas and making these conversations more open and more talked about without that layer of shame and guilt. Because, you know, even in corporate settings, we didn't start having these conversations until the last couple of years. And in the 60s and 70s, when people would talk about, and 80s, drug addicts and crackheads, they usually were only talking about one demographic. And it wasn't until that crossed over the line that all of a sudden it's starting to be a problem that we need to talk about and address. So it's kind of like a tornado in a way. But I think, you know, as with other things that have changed in the past, um, and some things that haven't, right? We're all just moving forward, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly.
I noticed that my biggest thing that I notice with people is I think they're afraid I'm going to think they're an alcoholic, right? If they drink. And all of a sudden, it's just like they're explaining every drink to me or like all this stuff. And I'm just like, it's, you know, that like Chrissy was, and also Lisa said, that's not my business. Your drinking isn't my business. It's my drinking that's my business. Um, and so they become, you know, like that. And I remember when I would go see my dad, I think that he was afraid that I was going to try to like recruit him to sobriety, like it was my job or something, like my new job as a recovered alcoholic. And you know, but I don't mess with my dad is a real dedicated Scotch drinker. He is a, you know, very successful ex oh, I always call him an arms dealer, but he was a defense contractor and he was ex-military. He was in the army. He retired as a colonel. So I just feel like he's earned the right to drink as much scotch as he wants, you know? But I think that he was always worried that I was going to try to kind of preach at him or, you know, try to explain things to him, but that's not really what it's about. I think mostly we're just trying to fight for our own survival. So we don't really have time to fight for your survival and our survival. but that's just kind of my experience. And it's mostly just within my family. People I know out in the community, for the most part, haven't treated me differently, which is good. I don't know what they say about me behind my back, but again, like Lisa said, that's none of my business. No.
I will say that the most visceral or like intense reactions that I've gotten when I say that I'm an alcoholic are from people who come circle back around and they're like, I think that I might have a problem. Like, yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's funny. Okay, let's see. This one is in relation to the pandemic. How do you think the pandemic has affected people's recovery?
In so many weird and wonderful ways. Last year, the YPAW community, the Young People of AA community, put on what we called WebbyPaw, which was like a web conference, and it was global, and we almost broke Zoom. It was so cool. I mean, we had speakers from Tokyo, we had one from Germany, we had one from New York. Like, we have been able to connect in ways that we have not been able to previously. I will say that, like, there are people in recovery now who just came up in a different way than I did. I mean, I came up going to conferences and events and stuff like that, and there are people who got sober like on their couch, you know what I mean? And so it's such an incredible experience to watch these people have so many hardships as far as like accessibility, just in general, and to still get sober and stay sober. That has been truly incredible to watch.
Yeah, I love that too. I remember, so at the beginning of the pandemic, I was like, oh, we got to find a way to keep some meetings up. And, I was thinking about myself, of course, and not anybody new and in recovery. And a lot of people I know went back to drinking. They just couldn't take being on Zoom, or couldn't take like not seeing people. And because circling back around to the mental health aspect of addiction, they just couldn't get out of your house. And a lot of times, like, the government would say that meetings are not essential, but liquor stores would be open. And I'm like, so alcohol is essential, but recovery is not essential. And that just, threw me for a loop. And I also, first being on Zoom and starting Zoom for my home group, that was huge. And I mean, we would have people all over the world Zoom into our small little group. It was so amazing. And then I could go, like, if I was wanting to go on Zoom at like 10 a.m., I could go around the world, and it's a night meeting over there, like on the other side of the world. And that was really neat until the pandemic still kept going and meeting places were still not opening back up, and people were still afraid to see each other and get that social interaction of like seeing faces. I got really close to maybe not drinking again or like throwing away the recovery I had, but something much worse. My mental health was horrible because now that I'm sober, I'm more extrovert, and I will talk to anybody if I can, but I don't want to be the one to pick up the phone first. It's like, it's one of those things where I'm not reaching out for help, but nobody knows where to go. If they're newly thinking that they're alcoholic, and they don't know where, because before, like, you can go on the internet and search Alcoholics Anonymous, and there's some places like the aaaintergroup.org and just Googling Alcoholics Anonymous. And it will send you phone numbers that you can call to find meeting places, or you can find lists online of where to go. And with everything closed and everything on Zoom, it's just really hard to connect with someone who is new. So that it's like a double-edged sword. You know, on the one side, it was good. So I guess one side it was good because you could connect with people around the world who are just like you. But on the bad side, you can't connect with the new person that's coming that needs help, you know. And I know a lot of people also who have taken their lives because of the disease, and they don't want to drink again, but they don't know how to control their emotions or feelings or any of that. And so that was a really sad part of the pandemic. And I'm just really hoping we're getting past that now on a personal level. There are meeting places now that have opened up and that are in person. And, you know, I just feel encouraged to go to all of them because I need that person physically. Like I need to see them, see their facial expressions, not be distracted by, you know, my kids, my dogs, my mom, or whatever, you know, things all around my home. So, yeah.
Andy, did you want to?
For me, the pandemic actually had, you know, people are always different. For me, the pandemic put me in a situation where I had to deal with some things that I had been avoiding, because, you know, I love the recovery community. I have, you know, like a second and sometimes first family when it comes to the recovery community. But I wasn't always coming home, and that feeling of happiness was translating when I walked through my front door. So for me, the pandemic sort of forced me to be more comfortable and solid in my foundation and sobriety while I was by myself. Um, and it was really, you know, magical for me to get through that. And I also know many people who got like a lot of sober babies that came out of the pandemic. I think a lot of people were figuring out that they might have had drinking or drugging problems with the pandemic than they thought beforehand. And I did see some people that it was the solitude and isolation was too much for them to bear, and they started using drinking again. And I know some people that passed away also because they just couldn't make it back. So yeah, I was just like, you know, remembering that. So with the good sometimes comes bad also.
Yeah. So I'm going to move on to the next question. Since we kind of started a little late, I think we're going to ask about one or two, maybe at the most three more questions, and then we will wrap it up. So this one is, what advice would you give someone that has a loved one that is addicted?
Go to Al-Anon. Go to Al-Anon. It's
Go to Al-Anon.
yeah. It's I mean, that's been like the most like fruitful, I guess, endeavor that I've seen people go on. It's helped people in my family. It's helped a lot of families. The wonderful thing about the program of Al-Anon is that it empowers the loved one to find themselves and their own boundaries. The focus no longer revolves around the alcoholic or the addict themselves. And for the loved ones, that's how, I mean, we as alcoholics and addicts are like a tornado. You know, we sweep through people's lives and we take up so much of your space and your time and all of that. And so Al-Anon gives these loved ones their power back, and it gives them their peace of mind back, and it shows someone how to live their own life, regardless of the alcoholic or the addict that's in front of them.
Yeah, I think too, there's a whole chapter in the big book, and that's a book that was written. It's called Alcoholics Anonymous. And in the program, we call it the big book. And there's a whole chapter that's dedicated to wives and the family afterward, and even like your employers and stuff. And it's really good, even if you're not an alcoholic, to just get one of those books and just kind of read through it and to understand your loved one. It really helps, along with Al-Anon, to help understand the addiction process and what's going through your loved one's head. I know, like I said, my mom doesn't drink, but she's definitely learned so much from this book, because it, in black and white, explains us and explains basically, like, it's the 12-step program of Al-Anon too, and it's just a really good read, just to get your own self back, because like Lisa was saying, all of that time and energy that you spent into trying to get your loved one sober, what have you, has exhausted you. And I just feel like, if they see that you're being, tough love and strong and taking back your own power instead of giving it all to your, addiction loved one, then they might start seeing something, and something might change, and it can't hurt, is also what I was going to say.
Sometimes I think back. I mean, I'm super great. Let me preface, right? I'm super grateful where I am today in life. Sometimes, and it not in a resentful way, just like as a melancholy thought, right? It does cross my mind every once in a while, like what would have happened if my mother would not have enabled me as long as she did. And I think about that, like how young would I have been getting into recovery? And I don't think about it in a bad way at all. It just, maybe I thought about it twice in therapy sessions, right? But in my story, I was, I don't want to use the word allowed, but like my family did enable my behavior a lot. I didn't end up on the streets. I didn't end up um, in other places as well. So I don't know. I'll leave each person to make up their own minds when it comes to that. Um, if I had a child in the situation that I was in now, and I don't know that because I haven't had a child, right? So things change, I've heard, once that happens, but I would um, get my child help sooner rather than later, at whatever cost, even if that cost meant a broken relationship.
So to be clear, the Al-Anon program is basically a program that was started for mothers, family members, significant others,
Neighbors,
and
anybody.
yes, neighbors, right? I always tell my neighbors, I'm like, because they know I'm sober, and it's two sisters that live on either side of me, and they're really funny because they drink and they have parties every once in a while, and I'm just like, it's okay. I can tell you're not an alcoholic. I never hear any screaming, and the cops are never here. And they're just like, okay. But yeah, so Al-Anon, I mean, it's technically like the Alcoholics Anonymous program, but it really is applicable to any addicted person. So you don't have to feel like Al-Anon is just for like loved ones of alcoholics. I would truly say that it is loved ones of anybody who's going through any sort of addiction issue. And I just wanted to kind of express that. So let's see, there's another one that says, what should I do and not do to be understanding and supportive of what you're going through or have gone through. So what can people, they're kind of asking, you know, what is it that they can do, or what would, and on the flip side of that, what would you discourage them from doing in order to be supportive of what you have gone through as somebody who is addicted or in recovery?
I would say making assumptions, starting with the assumption that people handle things the same way, whether it's trauma even. Uh, Even people who go through the same trauma in the same household will come out completely different, just based on a lot of different factors. So making assumptions and I'm gonna ponder on that one more minute.
Okay,
Let's
you
see
can
if
come back.
Lisa or Chrissy has a little bit more to add.
Mm-hmm.
Something that I read a long time ago that I really, really liked was that sometimes our job isn't to, or sometimes our opinions aren't wanted or needed. Sometimes our only job is just to listen. And I find that to be true for addicts and alcoholics. Like, before I got sober, before I got into a recovery community, um, that really understood me, um, I I was told by a lot of different people what I needed to do or how I needed to fix my problem, or, you know, and it happens with mental health and stuff. Like, that's why I don't talk to my mom about my mental health stuff, is because she'll tell me to just take a walk or something, you know, and bless her, she tries, but that's not gonna cut it. And so, I personally don't react super well to somebody trying to give me advice on a situation if they don't necessarily have the experience on it.
Yeah, I second that. Because that's exactly what I was talking about. Every time, well, when I first got into recovery, my mom, she would just be like, why can't you stop? Just stop. And I'm like, it's not about willpower, but she didn't understand that, and just gave me lots of advice on something she didn't know anything about. And the advice that she had given me when I was younger about my mental health stuff led me to, to find other ways to cope with that. So I just feel like sometimes people's opinions aren't wanted or needed. And the more being an alcoholic and an addict, the more you tell me I need to do something, the less I want to do it. And I just think that like when I was left alone, like I was told one thing, and then I was left alone to try to figure it out for myself as far as recovery. Things just like skyrocketed from there, and like I changed into a better person, and my family will vouch for that, and my friends that are around now will vouch for that. I mean, I guess not many of them knew me back whenever I was in my disease, but I don't like being told what to do. And if you tell me what to do, I'm going to retaliate. And I love what Lisa said about like just not giving opinions or what have you, and sometimes just listening. Because that's what I needed, especially in the beginning, is just someone to listen to me. For anything. And I mean, that was one of the best outlets that I had, as when I had gotten sponsorship, and she actually like listened. That helped tremendously, just to get everything out for somebody who related to me. And if you don't relate to someone, still, I mean, it doesn't hurt to listen to what they have to say, and maybe giving a little bit of advice, but don't push any subjects onto anybody, because like I said, we'll push back and then you get nowhere.
Another really wonderful thing is, or another wonderful thing to contribute to be supportive, is to really try to communicate how the person has improved, or what goals they've met, or how they're growing, or because with alcoholics and addicts, we have a really hard time seeing our own growth for ourselves, because we've lived with such a bad narrative that it's like it's kind of hard to get that chip off of our shoulder. And so when I continue to see the same sponsor for a year, or I have the same sponsee for however long, or somebody that just is consistent with me, who's able to say like, hey, you've made a lot of progress in the last month or the last 6 months or something, like that feels amazing to hear from somebody outlining my progress.
Positive reinforcement. So Andy, did you have anything else you wanted to add to that? So my thing,
No, I think they covered it.
yeah, my big thing was I hate it when people, like, I feel like they feel sorry for me in some way. You know, it's almost like they look at you like they feel sorry for you. That's my big thing. I'm like, there's no reason for that, you know. And I find that most of the people I know that in recovery, including myself, like, I'm really proud of my recovery. You know, I mean, I fought really hard for it. I worked really hard for it, and now I'm really proud of it. So, um, I am going to ask the final question, and I think that'll be a good note to end on. And it is, what keeps you in recovery? What keeps you in recovery? And Christy looks excited.
For sure, I am excited because that sense of ease and comfort that I got from drinking or taking a drug, now I get that when I'm in recovery, and every day that I do some small steps and some simple things, and I listen to, you know, my friends that are also in recovery, there's just this joy that comes over me, and it's they talk about it, and it's called like a pink cloud, like you're just happy. And now I'm happy about life. I'm happy to wake up. I don't usually stay in bed too long, and you know, I am proud of my recovery, and that's what keeps me in recovery. I do not want to feel sick, as sick as I was. The 6 years ago, I was very sick. I was suicidal. I was, you know, I had basically had no money. I had nowhere to go, nowhere to turn. You know, my kids are being taken from me, and I just felt miserable. And today, I don't feel miserable. I feel good most of the time. And just seeing what the program of recovery has done for myself and other people that have come in after me is such a joy. I don't want to miss any of it. And I just think it's so beautiful. I just don't want to miss any of it.
My thing is like, it's two major things that keep me coming back. The first point is kind of a two heads are better than one situation. Like when I'm on my own trying to solve my own problems, it's the brain that created the problem is not then going to bring the solution. So when I keep going to meetings, or when I talk to my sponsor, or listen to a podcast or a speaker tape or something like that, I'm going to hear something that I wouldn't have heard otherwise. And that just contributes to my well being. But the main thing that keeps me coming back is seeing it happen for other people. It's watching other people get sober and then watching them come back. Like I might go to a meeting once or twice that I don't normally go to and see a newcomer who says that they're going to be back the next week. And I'm like, oh, I think I'll go back to that meeting. You know what I mean? I wasn't going to go to that meeting before then, but I want to see it, that person make it another week. That's like really exciting to see somebody in early recovery in their first couple of weeks or something, and to see them come back the next week is like, it's such a joy.
For me, for me, I do not need any more proof. And I'm so sorry because I know I'm gonna sneeze any second.
It's okay.
But okay.
Perfect.
So I don't need any more proof in my life that alcohol and drugs is not the solution that will alleviate the reasons why I was drinking, right? The reason why I'm an alcoholic was because, again, I'll repeat, from a medical or scientific aspect, it was a very quick solution to an incredibly hard anxiety problem that I had that just skyballed out of control quickly. So I don't really need any more proof um, that drinking has never worked for me. And unfortunately, I just can't do it like a normal person. It's just not part of my story. Another thing is, because I can drink whenever I want to drink. I have a healthy career today. I definitely have a car that can get myself to the um, liquor store, even though I live across the street from one. But and I always reserve that right to drink whenever I want to, even tomorrow. I have never had a day sober worse than my last day drinking, ever. And I've I've dealt with death. I've dealt with other kinds of personal loss in sobriety as well. As I got sober, I got to address some mental health issues. I've been to um, mental health treatment for trauma and PTSD, which, was another layer that I needed on top of that. I've gotten to tackle an eating disorder that was weaving in and out of my story before the alcoholism. That was my first ism, in sorts, to just like alleviate that anxiety that I was living with day to day. So I've gotten to do all these things. Like I don't need a drink. I really don't need a drink. Um, and I call myself an honest alcoholic. If you ask me right now if I wanted to drink again, my answer is an obvious yes. Of course I want to drink again. Um, just the good far outweighs the possibilities. I'm not about that scientific method anymore. F around and find out. I'm not about that life anymore. I'm happy where I am now. Yeah, I'll fight hard to keep that.
All right. Well, we certainly appreciate you guys joining us tonight and hanging in there with us. I know we had a little bit of a delayed start for this particular session, but all's well that ends well. That's one of my favorite sayings. No. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. Is there anything that you would want to part with, anything you'd want to share with people who are curious about addiction as we wrap this up? And it's okay if there's not anything either way. But if you have any parting words, we would love to hear them. And then we will say our goodbyes. And it looks like Chuck's coming back online, possibly. But I will let you guys.
I just wanted to say thanks for having us.
As well, I wanted to thank everyone for being here to listen and for having us as well. And, I always love to say, if you are a normal drinker, raise a glass to us because we can't partake.
Nice.
Yes, thank you so much for having us here and letting us tell some of our side to take some of the stigma off of what an alcoholic is or a drug addict is, and someone who is in recovery, and it doesn't have to look a certain way for it to be a certain way. And then I love that all's well that ends well. So with that, I just thank everyone for being here and listening.
Yeah. You guys go have a happy and wonderful Thanksgiving tomorrow. And with that, we will wrap it up. Thank you all for being here tonight.